Rose Run. Far back on Bunner's Ridge close to Morgantown there is a run, as all of the little valleys in this area are called. It was and still is referred to as Rose Run. The name came from the wild roses that once covered the valley and choked out everything. In this small valley once dwelt some of the better-off farmers on the ridge. One of the richer, prouder farmers had a beautiful daughter whose name was Rose. In spite of her father's objections, she loved a city boy. One night while she was with her lover at a dance, her father shot at the young man, but the bullet hit and killed Rose. The father swore the young man had killed her, and the other farmers naturally believed him. The young man was hanged shortly afterward. Still filled with bitterness, though, the father took the girl's body and buried it in a remote spot on his farm. Soon, however, from her grave sprang a multitude of wild roses that seemed to spread like wildfire, choking the very sunlight from the soil. In a short time, the whole farm was covered, and then the valley too. The roses are gone now, but the story remains. Ray Tatterson, Fairmont, 1959, as told to him by Tessie Williams of Bunner's Ridge, who learned the story from her grandfather. Post-inspection. On a cold, wintry day in 1950, Mr. Barron reported for work as usual. Soon after he arrived at the a.k.a. mine, a horrible accident occurred. Sam McCormick, a foreman, was coming out of the mine riding on a motor car. As he was rounding the curve, the car overturned, crashing Sam against the wall, killing him almost instantly. The cause of the fatal accident could not be determined. Perhaps it was the excessive speed. No one knew. After work in the mine had again returned to its regular pattern, Mr. Friedman was working in the same passage just on the other side of the airlock from where the accident had occurred. When he heard someone walking around outside, he assumed it to be Mr. Barron, as he was due to come any time. Friedman thought nothing of it and continued to work. Some time passed by and he could still hear someone walking on the other side of the doors. Whoever it was would walk a while and then pause, walk some more and then pause again, just as though he were studying something. Friedman could stand it no longer, so he called, "Mr. Barron, is that you there?" But there was no answer, just silence. Friedman started back to work, but just then he heard steps sounding once more. So he called again, "Mr. Barron, is that you?" And still there was no answer, not a word. He became frightened and rushed to the doors, determined to find out who was there. Opening the doors and looking down the dusky passage, he could barely distinguish a figure bending over and apparently inspecting the rails. When he called, the figure straightened up and it started walking toward him. When it came into the light, Friedman saw that it was not Barron, but Sam McCormick. He immediately slammed the door shut and fell to the ground. A short time later, Mr. Barron did appear and found Friedman trembling violently. Upon hearing his story, Mr. Barron thought that Friedman must have fallen asleep, for he had just come straight down the passage and had seen no one. Walter C. Sibley, 1958, as told to him by Mr. Barron, who still worked in the a.k.a. mine at the time. The Glass Jug. Mr. Peck had beaten his son to death because he drank up all his wine. The day of the son's funeral, he told the people he'd fallen and killed himself, and nobody knew anything but that to be the truth. That night, after his funeral, Mr. Peck decided to go downtown and buy himself a drink or two. On his way home, he could hear something beside him, but couldn't see anything. He went on a little further and saw a jug tipped up walking beside him. It seemed as if someone were drinking out of it. Then a voice said, "Thirsty, pup?" and repeated this over and over. Frightened, Mr. Peck grabbed the jug and yanked it away, and it broke against his chest. A piece of the glass cut his throat badly, and as he was getting very weak, the voice said, "I'm still here, Pop." Then, Mr. Peck fell over and bled to death. Mrs. Ethel Cunningham, Smithfield, 1948. The upstairs bedroom. Mr. and Mrs. George Sipe bought an old house in the country for a very reasonable sum. The house had the reputation of being haunted and no one would live there. Years before, in the only upstairs bedroom, a woman was murdered by having her throat slit with a straight razor while she was asleep. The Sipes moved into their new home. Everything went well, and the murder room was only used as a spare bedroom. Several months later, a huckster passing through the neighborhood stopped late one night and wanted to spend the night. Mr. Sipe showed their guest to the spare room, and they all retired for the night. He was reassuring his wife that all the stories about the room were false when they heard a loud scream. Their guests came down the stairs 2 at a time. The huckster stated that as soon as he fell asleep, he was awakened by a wetting noise. Rising up in bed, he saw a woman in a nightdress coming toward him with a shaving mug, wetting a long straight razor. He thought he was dreaming, but she came closer and began to place lather on his neck. As she drew back to use the razor, he leaped from the bed and rushed downstairs to find his hosts. His nightclothes and neck were wet, and Mrs. Sipe insisted that she saw traces of lather there. Mr. and Mrs. Sipe lived on for many years in this house. They never again were bothered with the walking ghost, but then again they never used the upstairs spare bedroom. Mrs. Hazel Booth is told to her by Mrs. Ava Finley of Grafton. The Living Corpse. One night, early in the Civil War, a wagon load of wounded soldiers was camped on the edge of the small town of Pennsboro, waiting for a doctor and supplies to catch up with them. The following morning, one of the soldiers had apparently died and was taken to the local undertaker to be prepared for burial. Because this was a busy day for the undertaker, the body was placed in a tub of ice to preserve it until it could be embalmed. Early the next morning, the actual embalming was to begin. The first thing that was done was to sew the corpse's mouth shut from the inside. Next, a needle and tube were attached to each arm, so that the embalming fluid could be pumped into one arm while the blood was drained from the other. This process had no sooner begun than when the man sat up. The people present could see the man's mouth trying to work and opening to the limits of the stitches. The tubes were quickly yanked from his arms, but by this time it was too late, because the embalming fluid had reached his heart. The man slowly settled back onto the table, as if accepting his fate. Shortly after that, many strange things began to happen at the undertaker's shop. Furniture would be arranged and bodies moved, but the strangest thing of all was that no matter where embalming fluid and needles would be hid, the next morning the needles would be bent and the fluid spilled over the floor or missing. Some people in the community thought it was the work of practical jokers, but others were not so sure. It did not matter for the undertaker, for within a year he had lost his mind, with only memories of a happy childhood. Gene Hickman of Clarksburg, 1958. Grew up in Lost Creek. Big Max. Big Max is now a foreman for the large construction company in Cleveland, Ohio. He's a man about 6.5 feet tall and weighs about 250 pounds. So it's easy to see how he got his name, and wherever he goes, it's not long before his name follows him. When he worked in the mines, Big Max was known for his strength. He used to run from the Osage mine where he worked to his home 10 miles each way. One time a motor car fell over on a man and pinned him from the waist down. Big Max lifted the car by himself and saved the man's life. He could load more coal than 6 ordinary men, and he would stay in the mine for days. For as long as a week sometimes. It seemed as though nothing could hurt him. One time there was a bad cave-in the section he was working. Everyone was killed but Big Max, and when the men found him, he had dug himself halfway out. Some of the miners looked on him as a kind of god in the mines. But Big Max left the coal mines. And this is the story he told my father. After that bad explosion that closed off Section 5 of the main run, all of the men in the section were either killed or accounted for, except one. He was never found, his time card wasn't punched in or out. The mine officials would not pay his wife the welfare money because they thought he had deserted her. Well, anyway, I opened up the section and went in first to check and see if it was still hot. Our main job was to set in new beams and clean up the sections so new track could be laid. After I checked the place completely for gas, I started helping the other men set beams. And one of the subsections was a bad place. And since none of the other fellows wanted a chance putting in new beams, I said I would go ahead and set it in the first one for him. I went back into the dark section and was getting ready to put in the first beam, and one of the fellows came back to help. I said, "So you're not afraid after all?" And he said no. It was then that I noticed that I had never seen him before. He did not look like a miner, at least not like a healthy one. His skin, even though it was covered in coal dust, was milkish white. His eyes were set deep in his head like deep wells, and although he could do as much work as me, he was just a bag of bones. After we had put up the first beam, I started cleaning the place for the second beam. The man who was helping me grabbed the shovel and said, "Don't put that post there, put it here!" He said it real mad-like, so to keep down an argument, I started doing as I was told. I'd cleaned about a foot of loose coal and slate when I hit something. It looked like a boot. man's boot. Just as I turned around to tell my helper that I'd found the remains of a man, he disappeared. Didn't particularly think anything of it because I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, since I hadn't been to bed in 3 days. And then too, I thought he might have got scared and gone back. Well, anyway, I reported the body to the authorities and went home. In the middle of the night, I was sleeping soundly when there was a knock at the door. I went and opened it and discovered it was the fellow at the mine who had been helping me. He said, "Thank you for helping me. Now my wife can get what is coming to her." He disappeared again. I got dressed and went immediately to the mine just to see who this fellow was that I discovered. He was the man who had been missing. They could tell by his miner's tags. I left the mine and have never and shall never set foot in a mine again. Carl McKinney, Fairmont, 1959. Help. Many years ago, Dr. Anderson was awakened by a persistent knocking on his front door. Accustomed to getting calls at all hours, he quickly dressed and hurried downstairs. The red glow from the hearth cast flickering shadows through the room. Glancing at the large wall clock, he noticed it was just past midnight. Outside, the moon shone brightly on the white snow. He opened the door and was surprised to see a young girl, 12 or 13 years old, standing before him. He had never seen her before. She was dressed in a little blue coat, carried a white fur, and her cheeks were ruddy from the cold. "Please come to my mother. She's sick, and I'm afraid she'll die." The doctor asked, "Who's your mother?" "Mrs. Ballard. Please hurry." Then the girl explained that they had only recently moved to the old hostler place, about 3 miles away. She said she thought her mother had pneumonia, and since her father was dead, there was no one else to come for help. When the doctor said that he would come at once and do all he could, the girl darted away, running up the road in the direction of the old hostler place. Dr. Anderson bundled up his sheepskin coat, pulled down the ear flaps on his cap, picked up his bag, and went out to the barn to get his horse. He lost no time in throwing up the bridle and saddle, picking up the blanket because it was blue cold, and heading for the old hostler place. For in those days, pneumonia was a dreaded illness. As he hurried his horse up the snow-covered road, he kept thinking about the bravery of the young girl who had faced the severe cold to seek his help. She had run off before he could ask her in to warm herself, yet she hadn't appeared to be cold. His thoughts soon returned to his own discomfort, because his feet and hands began to feel numb before he saw the glow of the lamp of the old hostler place. Quickly tying his horse to the gatepost, he threw the blanket over it and hurried up the snow-covered walk to the porch. There was no answer to his knock, so he opened the door and walked in. The sight was a common one to him. There in a bay lay the sick woman. The fire was almost out, but the oil lamp still burned. He felt the woman's pulse and found that she had a very high fever. He placed more wood on the fire because the room was cold, and then set to work with the confidence that comes from having handled many emergencies. He knew if he could break the fever, he could possibly save the woman's life. After giving her medicine, he heated water and applied poultices to her chest. She soon rallied enough to ask, "How did she know to come?" The doctor replied that her daughter had come for him, that she was a brave girl to go out on such a bitter night. "But I have no daughter. My daughter has been dead for 3 years. What? What? Why, a young girl 12 or 13 years old called me out of bed and begged me to hurry here. Couldn't have been my daughter. She died from pneumonia 3 years ago. Who could it have been then, and how did she know that you were ill? She was dressed in a little blue coat with a white fur." My daughter had a blue coat and white fur. They're hanging in the closet over there." Dr. Anderson strode over to the closet, opened the door, and took out the blue coat and white fur. His hands trembled when he felt the coat and fur, and found them still warm and damp from perspiration. Terry Ann Bradlin, Mannington, 1963, is told to her by her aunt, who heard it from a friend's grandmother. The incident is supposed to have happened in Wetzel County.